thanks for listening. In the last podcast, we learned about the growth of political parties in the United States. In this one, we'll learn about how the Democratic Republicans came into power and replaced Federalist programs with their own. So let's start with the election of 1800. Two parties had candidates in the presidential election. As you can see down here, John Adams, represented by the Federalists, and Thomas Jefferson, represented by the Democratic Republicans. And if you need to remember how they were different, that is outlined or illustrated right here. Well, the Democratic Republicans argued the Federalist Alien and Sedition Acts violated the Bill of Rights, and Federalists called the Democratic Republicans radicals. Radicals are people who take extreme political positions. The Federalist candidate, President John Adams, lost the election. As you can see here, there was a tie between the two Democratic Republican candidates, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And you can see that they each had 73 votes. And John Adams came in third with 65. And you can see up here that it says that a tie in the Electoral College resulted in a deadlock in the election of 1800. To avoid such a result in future elections, Congress passed the 12th Amendment. According to the Constitution, the House of Representatives had to choose between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. They were the top two vote getters, so that's who they had to choose from. The Federalists, however, still controlled the House of Representatives. And it was true that the Democratic Republicans wanted Thomas Jefferson as their president. Even so, it would be the Federalists that would get to decide the winner, since they had the majority in the House of Representatives. But this decision didn't come easy. Members of the House of Representatives voted 36 times before finally electing Jefferson as president, and Burr would become vice president. Now, this will lead to this if you look down here closely. And that's Aaron Burr, and he's got a smoking gun in his hand. And you're going to see exactly why he has that when we talk in class. When we talk about a duel that Aaron Burr got into, the duel is pretty important because for a lot of people, it explains why Burr didn't win for president. And it's what caused the 36th vote that kind of gave the election to Jefferson. So you'll learn about that in class. It's a pretty interesting story. So Jefferson becomes president, and Thomas Jefferson was one of the United States' most talented presidents. Besides being our third president, he was a skilled violinist, a horseman, and an amateur scientist. He was also an architect. He helped in the planning and design of Washington, D.C., and you can see that here. His books became the core of the Library of Congress, which is the largest library in the world. And he also helped design his house, Monticello. Now, as president, Jefferson tried to unite Americans by promoting a common way of life. He wanted the United States to be a nation of independent farmers. He didn't like the crowded city life that he had seen in Europe. He believed that a nation of independent farmers would have strong morals and good democratic values. As president, he lived a simple life. He believed in a modest role for the central government as well. In his first inaugural address, he said, "Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists." Again, this shows how Jefferson was trying to unite Americans by showing what we have in common. But Jefferson did want to make some changes now that he was elected. He thought that the central government should have less power than it did under the Federalists. He sought to end many Federalist programs. Jefferson asked Congress, now controlled by his party, to let the Alien and Sedition Acts end. It did. And Jefferson also released people in prison under these acts. Congress also ended many taxes passed by the Federalists, including the whiskey tax. And you'll remember that we talked recently about the Whiskey Rebellion. The loss of tax money lowered the government's income. So to save money, Jefferson reduced the number of government employees and he also reduced the size of the military. Jefferson also tried to replace the financial systems that were set up by Federalist Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton's system relied on a certain amount of government debt. He thought that the people who were owed money by their government would make sure their government was run well. Jefferson, however, was against public debt, and he worked hard as president to reduce the amount of money that the government owed. Jefferson had less power over the courts. Under the Judiciary Act of 1801, John Adams had appointed as many Federalist judges as he could before Jefferson took office. This meant that the new Democratic Republican president faced a firmly Federalist judiciary or court system. Adams had also appointed Federalist John Marshall as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Marshall would serve as Chief Justice for over 30 years, and during that time, the Supreme Court upheld federal authority and strengthened the federal courts. Before Jefferson took office, President Adams had selected a man named William Marbury for a job in Washington, D.C. But when Jefferson took office, his Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to give Marbury his job. Marbury sued, and the case went to the Supreme Court. In the case known as Marbury versus Madison, John Marshall ruled that the law under which Marbury sued was unconstitutional. That is, it went against the laws established by the Constitution. Marbury did not get his job. The Supreme Court had decided against Marbury, but the court's decision had another result, and probably even had a larger or more lasting impact. By declaring a law unconstitutional, the court established the principle of judicial review. This principle says that the Supreme Court is the branch of government that has the power to say exactly what the Constitution means. If the Supreme Court says that a law goes against the Constitution, then that law cannot be put into effect. Again, this is judicial review. In this quote from the Marbury versus Madison case of 1803, I think really sums up the importance of judicial review and reminds us of what the court's responsibility is. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. And again, their job is not to make the laws. Their job is not to enforce the laws. Their job is to explain the laws. So there you have it, a look at the transition from the Adams presidency to the presidency of Thomas Jefferson and the election of 1800. And a quick look at how Democratic Republicans replaced Federalist programs with their own. Thanks for watching.